All right, we will get started with our final panel of the day, and thanks to all of you for joining us again today, and hello again to those rejoining on the live stream as well. This final panel today is looking very much towards the future, so the future of transport, and that's everything from sustainability, decarbonisation, everything through EVs and future kind of transport modes and things that we maybe don't even know yet are coming down the track, right through to kind of the much more sci-fi end of the scale and space travel and navigation and the opportunities that presents. We won't be having sort of opening statements on the panel today, but just as sort of a starting point, you will notice that Lord Davies is not with us, as I said at the beginning of the conference. Guy Hoffman has very kindly stepped into the role. We will try and find a way of blending roads and local transport with Maritime and see where we end up. But thank you very much for sticking with us. So as I kind of introduce my panelists, I'll kind of lead in with a question. So firstly, on my left, we've got Anthony Brown, MP, who's the Minister responsible for aviation, decarbonisation and space. Aviation is obviously particularly kind of an area that people really think of when they think of kind of pollution from transport. And so, Anthony, what specific steps is the government taking with the aviation industry to support that transition to sustainable fuels and to be a bit more forward-thinking and a bit more sustainable in our aviation sector?
Thank you. And very good question. So I'm the Minister for Aviation and the Minister for Decarbonisation of Transport, and slap bang in the middle of that is decarbonising aviation. So now that electricity production has become far more renewable, the biggest sector in terms of greenhouse gas emissions is transport. The biggest part of transport emissions is currently cars. We're electrifying cars, and I'm sure we'll end up talking about that. And soon, the biggest sector will probably end up being aviation in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and it's absolutely critical that we tackle that. There are no really completely simple, straightforward technological solutions. There is, I mean, if you go back 5 years ago, people were talking about electric planes, and there may well be some. Battery technology has come on very, very far. There are indeed some small electric planes that fly, and I'm sure they'll improve, but they're not going to fly you across the Atlantic. There is talk about hydrogen for planes, and I've just learned that Matt's very interested in hydrogen, and we might talk about that later. They're not there yet, they're not commercially, they might be there by 2050. But in the meantime, the solution that we're looking for in terms of most decarbonising aviation is sustainable aviation fuels, and or SAF for short. And we've got two policies there. One is we've got a SAF mandate in the UK, so that we'll be launching all the details of that. What we said publicly is that we want 10% of sustainable aviation fuel to be sustainable by 2030. That's only 6 years away. It's about 1% in the UK. It does exist, but it's very small, and we'll be laying out the legislation for that in the spring. The second part is we want to grow a sustainable aviation industry in the UK. And the thing about sustainable aviation fuel is it comes from many, many different feedstocks. So it can come from wood residue from the logging industry. It can come from used cooking oil. In fact, most of our SAF at the moment comes from used cooking oil. It can come from crops, which is what they tend to do in America. It can come from waste and bio-waste or municipal solid waste, which is where we're focusing in the UK. Ultimately, we think the long-term solution for sustainable aviation fuel is called power to liquid. So this is basically making aviation fuel out of air and water. So the aviation fuel, you need carbon, you need hydrogen, that's in water, that's in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It just takes a lot of energy to do it, and no one has yet done it at commercial scale. But we think in the future that will probably be one of the main sources of sustainable aviation fuel. So you asked, what are we doing? We've got I said a sustainable aviation fuel mandate, 10% by 2030. We are spending £130 million funding 13 different projects to develop and create sustainable aviation fuel in the UK, a whole range of different projects. And we're also introducing a revenue certainty mechanism, and this has been asked for by the industry, and it's similar to ones we have in wind power, where there's a lot of technology risk around this. You might say there's political risk as well. There's demand risk that actually for investors to come here and invest in building out sustainable aviation plants, they want to have some certainty of their revenue, and we'll be introducing a mechanism for that. In fact, that's set out in law that we will be doing that. and again, that will be coming over this spring. And so with all those different policies together, we should have a sustainable aviation fuel industry, and using it, that cuts emissions by about 70% for the flights. And with that's about half the reductions that we think we can do. The other half is the non-CO2 reductions. So this is things like the contrails in the air that at very high altitude, all these little white trails of water vapour, that there's lots of scientific evidence that actually they contribute to greenhouse to global warming, and we're looking at what can be done about that. That's a whole sort of research project. Again, we don't know the solutions there yet. There's a lot that can be done on efficiencies, so airspace modernisation at the moment. Our airspace, the how the planes stack around the airports and fly into the airports, it was designed about 70 years ago. It's incredibly inefficient. We can probably double or nearly double the amount of flying that goes on, and dramatically halve dramatically reduce the amount of stacking and so on that goes on. That will make them far more efficient. And indeed, even with the planes that exist, they can become more fuel efficient. They've done that. Just general technological advances have made them a lot more fuel efficient over the last 40 or 50 years. So with this whole sort of barrage of different policies, we will get to a far greener industry. Basically, I think aviation is, I would say this as aviation minister, luckily I believe it. I think aviation is a great industry. I've enjoyed flying. It's great for, it's good for the economy, clearly it's jobs. It's good for leisure, people travelling. I think that's great. I want people to carry on flying, but we've got to be able to do it in a way that doesn't damage the environment, damage the future of the planet, and that's what we'll be aiming for.
Sure, thanks very much, Anthony. And turning to our very kind substitute on the panel, Guy, I'm sort of trying to bridge kind of elements of Lord Davies' portfolio and yours. But I guess sort of at the core, when we talk about sustainability, particularly in kind of conservative circles, there's always this kind of tension around, being able to progress and move things forward, but doing so in the right way and doing so in a way which doesn't kind of hamper individuals and kind of hit people's pockets, and that people are kind of on board with that process. So what do you think are the sort of strategies and ways that we can communicate some of these sort of complex changes and policies to the public? I mean, we can't fix every pothole overnight. We can't dramatically increase the grid capacity overnight. It takes time. And with that, costs will eventually come down and things will make progress. But how do you bring people with us on this journey?
I think you've actually hit upon one of the most important and divisive issues that is facing any politician over the next 26 years as we navigate our journey to net zero, because we are clearly in a position that there is a desire to get to net zero. We have legislated for it. All political parties are bought into that. But we've got to navigate this both as a country, as an economy, as constituents, and take everybody with us politically. All of those things are difficult, and they require really, really clear comms. And the difficulties that we can see in London with Mayor Khan is a classic example of terrible comms, terrible policy, with consequential results in the Uxbridge by-election that we all could see. All right. But at the same stage, I do believe that there is, opportunities for us, and we need to make the case that by being one of the first in the market, we are doing great things. Anthony rightly talks about, as does the Secretary of State, we have the first sustainable flight, which is a UK-based project funded by UK government in part. You have pioneering examples of that. There is great things that we can do, but we need to balance it with a desire to take the people with us and also to make sure we win elections.
Thanks, Guy. And Matt Finch on the left of the panel here is the UK Policy Manager for Transport and Environment. And I should say again, our thanks to Transport and Environment for supporting this panel. Matt, there's obviously a lot of work being done, and some of which Anthony just covered off, particularly in the aviation sector, but across maritime and across road transport as well. Where do you think the sort of gaps are in the UK's approach towards sustainable transport?
So take those three items you just said. It's almost the good, the bad and the ugly. So the good is cars. The Z mandate is a very good policy. The charging regulation genuinely are good policy. In fact, talking about good comms, I think the government could have been better in telling everyone that this was a good policy. The example I'll give you is that within the charging regulations is a rule that says they have to be available 99% of the time. you won't go get a petrol station that will commit to being available 99% of the time. There might be, but there is no rules around that. But then you go to the other one. So aviation, bad is a bit harsh. Aviation is
more
okay.
challenging. I agree, it's more
It's
challenging.
more challenging. I'm really not sure the Jet Zero strategy will get us to net zero by 2050. The SAF mandate is looking good at the moment, but the big question is where is it? It was actually due last year before you were minister.
I know exactly where it is. Spring, you'll get it in spring.
It was due in January as well, and now spring is potentially summer. So
we never said January, we said spring.
But then Maritime is where there actually is a big problem in the sense that there are no policies right now. This is the ugly child of the policy. We need a step change in policy development in that area. We need the Clean Maritime Plan to come very quickly. We've got the ZEV mandate and we're going to have the SAF mandate, and it really makes sense to just learn the best of those two mandates and apply that to a form of shipping decarbonisation policy, an energy-based framework that applies to all UK ships that make UK port calls. It would be very hard for the department to sit there and say that's a bad policy since they've just done it twice. So I'd hope, and if Lord Davis was here, I'd be asking him to really have a think about that.
Thanks.
Can I make a follow-up point?
Yeah.
I'm allowed to.
Yeah, you do. Before we get to this.
Sorry. One thing you've got to be conscious of in decarbonising transport is the state of technology, and because there's no point legislating for something to happen if the technology doesn't exist to make it happen. So I could legislate that we could legislate that all planes should be hydrogen next year, but it just wouldn't happen because the technology is not there. And one of the role of government here is to try and sort of force the pace of a technology transition. We're in an amazing technology transition from fossil fuels to other forms of fuel, and we're forcing the pace of it through mandates, through subsidies, through grants and so on. But actually, we've got to be highly conscious of how far we can push it. There's no point, we should be ahead of the pack, but not so far ahead that we're detached from the pack. And there are areas where there are real, where the technology just isn't there. And one of them, on like hydrogen planes is one I mentioned before, but take high-powered motorbikes, for example. If you speak to the motorbike manufacturers, I do, for the high-end motorbikes, little electric mopeds, they're all over the place, but the high-powered motorbikes, the batteries are so heavy that if you wanted one, they just wouldn't work, basically. And again, the technology's not there. So the role of the government really is to sort of force the pace of change, but you can only do it so far and so fast. And what we have done is focus, and indeed governments around the world, focus on the areas where the biggest wins are. And the car industry is clear because it's such a big emitter, and electricity generation. But car industry in transport is where most of the effort went. And what we have seen is dramatic change in battery technology. So the range of batteries is increasing about 10% a year. It's about 45% over the last 4 years. The cost of batteries have come down about 90% since 2010. There's lots of different types of battery technologies out there now, and that's making lots of things possible that weren't possible before. So, for example, and I'll shut up in a second, on heavy goods vehicles, again, if we had this conference 5 years ago, everyone would say hydrogen is the only option, whereas now actually up to 26 tonnes trucks, lorries, there are commercially available battery electric 26-tonne trucks out there. There are all forms of aviation that keep coming to me every day. I have these meetings with new people inventing flying taxis and various other things, and basically it's because batteries have got so much better. They just weren't possible before. So we've got to be in lockstep with the technology that exists, and not just legislate for technology that doesn't exist.
Thanks very much. Flying taxis, I think, are the Prime Minister's preferred mode of transport. They're not. Daisy, just turning to you, last but not least for introductions. Daisy is a partner at Public First, and also it turns out very knowledgeable about space, as we were having a chat beforehand, which is very handy. We'll come on to space a little bit later, but obviously this year there's going to be a general election. How do you think elections and kind of political changes, I'm not saying there will be political changes, but let's assume for a moment that there will be. How do they influence the development and continuity of sustainable transport policies? And you've got kind of some great work being done by the ministers either side of us at the moment, and the rest of the department and the team there. But in a few months' time, that could be different people.
Yes, although I think it's really important to note that transport is a really weird area politically. That's not a comment on my fellow panellists. It's because transport responsibility is divided up amongst so many different levels. I mean, right from the international level, and you're talking about shipping, through to really quite local area devolution deals. And that leads to some really strange effects on the political side of things, because you get some policies, like the £2 bus fares, that last much longer than you might have expected their political life would be. And if they last into another government, one might expect could get locked in for a much longer period than was ever envisaged, and much longer than one would normally expect the Treasury to put up with, if we're totally honest. There are other policies where you would expect things to be much simpler. So, for example, over in Bristol, there's a general agreement that more money needs to go into transport infrastructure. There are two politicians of the same party. Can they agree on what to do? No. And it has massively held up development of new infrastructure in the system. So I think there is a real political complexity that makes it hard to predict what the impact of different electoral cycles will be, because actually the local electoral cycle and the international context has a really big impact on what's going on. And I think the second point I would make is that transport is really where, if you'll forgive me, the rubber hits the road when we come to communicating about net zero, as Guy has already referred to, because one of the ways in which the UK government has progressed so fast towards its net zero target, and deserves props for getting, basically we're halfway there already. We don't talk about it enough, and we definitely don't get coverage in the press for it, but we are halfway there. And if you tell people that, they're a lot more keen to continue with the fight, let me tell you. But in focus groups, basically no one knows that. Part of the way we have got there is that a load of that work has happened behind the scenes, in pulling carbon out of the electricity grid, in making devices more flexible and more efficient. We now need to start communicating a lot more to people about the changes that they're going to see. And yes, that is about cars, but it's also about devices that may be more automated, ways in which their car might power their house, ways in which they are going to be expected to show some flexibility with their power, ways in which it may impact their travel. It would be brilliant. I think everyone in this room would probably agree. It would be brilliant if we could just hit net zero like that. No one notices, everything stays the same, we all carry on flying as much as we want, we all carry on driving as much as we want. I really hope we can do that. That would be brilliant. And parts of the green sector that don't want that are kidding themselves about the fact that we all quite like our lives most of the time. But there are probably some things that are going to have to change a little. I tend to think a lot of them are going to change for the better, but government serves a really important role in acting as the voice that articulates that creates a vision of where the future is. So it's about creating quality of life now, but also articulating what needs to happen next and the journey we're all going to go on together. And that's important for investors, but it's also really important for the political debate in this country, that our politicians are leading the way in telling that story about what it's going to be like to live in the UK in 2050.
Thanks, Daisy. And I think, obviously on this panel, we're trying to look at both the kind of decarbonisation side of this topic, but then also looking ahead to the sort of future of transport more broadly and what those technologies might look like. And Matt, I'm going to come to you on this one, if I may, first. But just looking at, where do you see the opportunities in things like AI, in things like autonomous vehicles, in being able to help with also solving the decarbonisation side of this problem?
I can't really comment on AI, but I can talk about autonomous vehicles. And the autonomous vehicles that everyone immediately imagines, which is, if you're old enough, the kit from Knight Rider, that's decades away, right? But boring bog standard buses that drive along by themselves, that's pretty close. And all of a sudden, you are turning... They'll be electric because the government and the DFT will ensure electric buses become the norm. Then these things can run and run until they need to stop and charge and run again. And so all of a sudden you've taken out some costs, you've automated things. It just becomes easier to work with. So autonomous vehicles will arrive relatively quickly, within the next decade, but they might not be the vehicles that you think they are.
I know Guy wants to come in, but just to follow up quickly on that. obviously those vehicles are coming down the track, and as you say, they'll keep going until they need replacing or the batteries need replacing. But do you have concerns about that kind of wider impact on sustainability of where the electric vehicle market and autonomous vehicle market is at the moment, that actually the lifespan of these vehicles is perhaps not as long as so whilst their emissions are low in operation across their lifespan, it's still kind of to be resolved?
No, and actually EVs are being proven to last a lot longer than their combustion cousins. Batteries are lasting a very long time. In fact, as part of the ZEB mandate, the government stipulated that they all have to have an 8-year warranty on batteries. I mean, again, all manufacturers are fine with this because they're expecting them to last 15, 16, 17 years, which is longer than normal combustion cars last now. So, in fact, you're wrong, and it's the exact opposite. EVs are going to last for a long time.
Fewer moving parts in them.
And then the interesting thing is what happens when they do get near the end of the car's life, because the batteries are still useful. Will they go into our homes? Will they go into our garages? Will they become part of the energy system and not just the transport system?
Sure. Guy, I know you wanted to come in as well.
So I want to apologise that you've been deprived of the Welsh silver fox that is Baron Davies of Gower, who would be more eloquent on these matters than myself. But let me take the sort of the most iconic ship that there has ever been, which is of course the Titanic, which went down on the 14th of April 1912. And you ask yourself, if we had AI, proper tech, autonomous drivers, and possibly, who knows, better fuel of that particular ship, would it have gone down? The answer is unquestionably it would not have. And when we're looking about the safety, about the future, about whether tech is driving forward positive change, Leonardo DiCaprio would not be so famous. We would not be having Titanic 2 because I believe genuinely we would have a safer form of shipping. And then my second point would be that I think Angus is being a bit glass half full, and the idea that these vehicles that we are creating, or these particular mechanisms of transport we're creating, are not going to last as long as we would like right now, is looking at it completely the wrong way, in my humble opinion, because the idea that we're going to create stuff straight away and it's automatically going to last 30 years is naive. It's just not the case. All technological inventions down the generation started with more clunkier versions that then get more automated and more impressive and more technologically advanced as that work continues. And that is going to happen. It's happening obviously in a variety of forms, but will we have the proper things going forward, and are we on the right journey? I think yes we are, and I think frankly we're at the front of the queue. I take the point, which is a fair comment, not criticism, that we have to sell the journey we're on in a better way, and I think that is a cross-party decision that we need to try and do, whilst also making the case that we're all paid for by consumers and constituents.
Thanks. Daisy.
I want to pick up on something that Matt mentioned sort of obliquely, which is this stuff is also cheaper to run. So the energy transition has high startup capital costs, but actually the cost of EVs is now also coming down quite rapidly, in part thanks to the work that this government has done. Costs have been driven down also by the excellent work of the Chinese. And cars are getting a lot cheaper to start with, so in the next couple of years we'll probably reach price parity between EVs and ICE cars anyway. But the really exciting bit comes if you rebalance the levies off our electricity bills onto the gas bills, and then the fuel in them becomes so much cheaper. They're already cheaper to run, partly because if you put a unit of electricity into a car you get a lot more miles out than if you put a unit of petrol into a car, because you don't have to turn it into heat first and explode things and move levers, and you just turn on the engine. And then also because you can have more intelligence in the cars helping you to manage your speed and regulate your acceleration. My car basically drives itself, which is a good thing. And it nudges you back between the lines. And these things mean that not only is this tech going to be cheaper to run, it's much easier to subsidise capital going into people's homes than it is the fuel with which they run them, and that will be good to make this transition fair. They will also be nicer to use in a lot of cases. So I think the sort of unspoken lovely thing about EVs is that people who drive them don't want to go back because they're much nicer to drive. And that is true across a whole host of more sustainable transport. Guy's mention of the Titanic, I think there's a clear upgrade there. But there's a whole bunch of technologies where moving to electric makes them quieter, faster, nicer to use, safer, and all round just more fun.
And they are faster 0 to 60 as well, by and large, which is as another EV driver myself, I'm always in danger. Anthony.
Thank you. Can I just pick up on a couple of points? So as Minister for the Future of Transport, another part of my portfolio, I'm actually the Minister for Autonomous Vehicles, and Byron Davies has been leading the legislation through the Lords, but I'm the Minister responsible and be coming through the House of Commons soon. And actually, some forms of self-driving cars are closer than you think. I've been in a self-driving car around North London by the British company Wave, and it's really reassuring, actually, incredibly safe. Just drive around it. The car parked in front of us, double parked in front of us, and it stopped and overtook and went back. Another car swerved in front of us and it moved out the way. And the first uses will be, maybe it'll be on buses, as you said, but actually where you just use them on motorways, for example, they're coming. In terms of you asked about electric cars and how that would help. Matt answered a lot of the points. They last incredibly longer. But actually, one thing that Daisy touched on in her very first answer is smart charge networks and the electricity grid. And actually, this is where, if every house has an electric car and it's plugged into it, that actually will have an enormous battery into it, and you can charge at night when electricity is cheapest. You can then, when electricity is more expensive, actually you can use your car to power your house. And actually, if you have this in around the whole country, then actually what you've suddenly got is an incredibly flexible, adaptive, efficient electricity network in a way that we just don't have at the moment. And a lot of that will be driven by AI, about when you should use what. AI, and again, as Minister for Future Transport, AI and transport comes under me as well. So there's lots of uses of AI to make journeys more efficient. We see, just things like, not very that sophisticated, but things like AI, Google Maps and digital maps. Suddenly people are avoiding all the queues and the traffic jams and everything else, making journeys quicker, but actually just spending less time idling. And there will be a lot more developments like that mean that our use of roads is a lot more efficient and effective. So I think that all these technologies, we use them to try and make transport better, and I'm sure we'll succeed at that, because there's lots of new things we'll be able to do that we can't do at the moment.
Sure. Picking up on that point around efficient routing and how we can make journeys more efficient, and some of those advancements that we're seeing on what I'd call earth-based technology. Obviously, the way that we get there and the way that those satellites get better and the things that help us to make those changes is obviously through what we're doing in space. And Daisy, this is your opportunity to tell a story. I know you want to tell, but how do we make that part more sustainable? Because historically, obviously, launching something into space is not exactly environmentally friendly.
Yes. I actually do not have figures on that. It is basically moving things about and turning stuff into heat is usually really uses a lot of energy, and it's really hard to make it sustainable. But there are a lot of gains to be had, and we are good at satellites, and we're good at controlling satellites, and we're good at using the data from satellites, and those are all advantages that we can use to make great, I feel like I should channel Guy and say transformation using this technology, because just to give you 3 very quick examples. One is when you're pairing your AI in cars with great imaging, for example, one day I hope we will see streets that don't have parked cars on them, that will get all that space back, and we can plant trees in it, or kids can play in it, or we can eat dinner in it, or we can walk along it and have much wider pavements, or we can all scoot in it, or whatever. We get that space back because those cars don't have to park. They drop you off at work and then they zip back to a massive car park on the outside of town, or an underground car park somewhere, or they go and pick up somebody else. And so they're being used more of the time. We don't need as many of the things just sitting around gathering dust. That would be lovely. Satellites are going to enable that, as is AI in cars. Second of all, contrails, which Anthony mentioned earlier. One of the ways in which we are going to reduce the impact of the aviation industry is by reducing the number of contrails, and one of the keys to that is going to be feeding better satellite information, which actually the aviation industry is already used to having to feed into its information systems, into flight planning, so that we can reduce flight paths through types of weather systems that we know are more likely to cause contrails. And the third one, which is my favourite space use ever, now that I'm never going to be an astronaut and fly to Jupiter, is that we can use it to help shipping avoid whales. And bear with me, this sounds like the weirdest digression. It turns out that megafauna are really important for decarbonising the planet, because whale poo, ladies and gentlemen, is really important for seeding life in places in the oceans that normally don't get enough iron to create sustainable life. And the more life we have in the oceans, the more carbon they absorb. And therefore, if we can redirect shipping to go around pods of whales, we will lightly decarbonise our marine traffic.
Who had whale poo in their bingo for today's conference? Matt, I know you wanted to come in.
Yeah, and it's a follow-up to that, actually, because that's very inspirational. But where we are now with this stuff, we're rubbish, to be honest. So the average car is parked for 96% of its life. I'd love to see roads without parked cars on. Most cars are parked. We're really bad at using them. The average number of occupants in a 5C car is 1.2. Rubbish. We are really, really bad at using them. Planes, we spoke a bit about planes not making contrails, but most planes don't fly in a straight line. They are routed to fly around countries to avoid overflight fees in those countries. So there's lots of things that we can just do quite quickly. Car clubs would solve some of the problems with parked cars. Flying in a straight line would solve some problems with contrail. So we've got a low base, but we've got an inspirational vision to
I feel like
go
Matt
for.
didn't put enough space in that answer.
Sorry.
You covered it off so eloquently. I think we've got time for some questions now. So usual format. Please keep them to questions, not statements. And we'll go first to the gentleman with the paper in his hand there up again. Please say your name as well.
Somebody told me that once we get to the totally driverless situation, where you've got commercial traffic without drivers and cars, which may be a long way down the line, there's a much more efficient use of tarmac. In fact, I understand that you could put 3 times as many vehicles on the M25 or any road than before, because they're driverless. So that would cut costs of building roads.
Anyone want to come in on that?
Yeah, Roger can put Guy out of it.
No. Listen, the Tarmac Alliance is someone I didn't expect to meet when I first got this job, but I have met them not once but twice. And they would make the eloquent case that you are right, sir, and that there is much more intelligent ways to ensure that our roads are more approachable and also more particularly last longer. And there is a whole bunch of evidence that would show that if the way in which we use our roads can be massively improved. So the potential is, yes, you're right. I don't know about the 3 times stuff, but there is good stuff out there.
Thanks very much. We'll take the gentleman in the light pink shirt in the third row here.
Thank you. Hi, John Hood from T&E. This is probably a question for the Minister for Decarbonisation. I'd just like to ask a question about shipping emissions. UK shipping emissions are about 20% of UK total transport emissions. According to the Climate Change Committee, we have no credible policies for these shipping emissions. We desperately need the Clean Maritime Plan. DFT have been saying for about the last 6 months that the CMP will be published as soon as possible. My question is, will we ever see it?
Yes.
Can I add on to that? Because I'll sorry, have you finished? Sorry.
No, yes, we will see it, and it is. We will be. I'll say imminent, but it's coming. It's definitely this year, but I won't give you a date. There is. We have got a program. It's called SHORE for short, but it's SHORE. But it's which is funding a whole load of research onto clean maritime. And it's one of those points that I was making earlier about technology that we don't know. There's lots of different types of ships, and some solutions might be better for some types of ships than other types. And so you could have for short ferries, for example, it might be fine that they're battery, but actually if you've got a tanker that's going around the world, it might have to be hydrogen. And it's until we need to have a better idea of what technologies are possible. But but I agree, we need to go further, and you will get that the Clean Maritime Plan soon.
So can I just briefly answer the question from a slightly different angle, because I think the market will drive this much quicker than you think. All right. So yes, government needs to do stuff. You can make the same argument. Well, what about other countries who aren't signed up to this, etc., etc. But I was one of the ministers who introduced ESG into this country. All right. that drives all of the pension fund investing. It drives all stock market investing. And if you are a publicly quoted company with an ESG mandate, which everybody has to have, and it determines so much of investing. So for those who don't know what ESG, it stands for environmental, social and governance. But the environmental element is key. So if there is a quoted company who is doing the work that you're describing, then their shareholders, and more in particularly the large investors, pension funds and the like, are driving forward change way more, with no disrespect to the amazing ministers in many different governments, way more than government. And you see that in a whole host of other different activities where indeed the market is driving change. It will happen.
Thanks very much. And then the gentleman directly behind in the next row, in the scarf.
It's Keith Lester from Esher and Walton CPF. And I'd just like to ask about the future of a third runway at Heathrow.
So, this is something that's obviously been going to and fro for the last 30 years or more. Heathrow is a private company. It's a private decision by Heathrow about whether they build a third runway or not. And you need to ask them what their desire is on that. At the moment, I don't think they have any active plan on it. And it would require, we said, the government's policy on this has always been consistent, that it's a private project and it would require private rather than taxpayer money.
We've got time for just one more question. There's a gentleman up at the top there. Take that question there.
Josiah Deakin from the Community Transport Association. So the minibus is a very important form of vehicle for a number of sectors, including education, health, and the community transport sector. But the EV market for minibus is pretty much non-existent, other than some sort of post-manufacturer like upgrades and things like that. What can the government do to stimulate the market?
Thanks, Rach. I'm going to add to that slightly as well. So, in addition to my role at ConservativeHome, I'm a town and district councillor, and we have a couple of minibuses that we run community transport for. And we're looking to, obviously, as part of our wider ambitions to decarbonise what we're doing, to replace those. But the cost is prohibitive. I mean, for small councils, particularly to towns and parishes, to be changing this transport, it is really prohibitive. So is this something that the government can be doing something with, or is it very much about, as you say, Guy, waiting for the market to take the lead?
And we're all stuck with SUVs in the meantime.
Do you want to go first?
Coming back to some bigger themes earlier, and actually I just want to start at a very high level. So we have halved our greenhouse gas emissions overall as a country, and when you say we're doing really badly at Maritime, I mean, we do need to bring out a policy there. But actually, as a country, we've prioritised the biggest emissions, electricity production, electric vehicles and so on, and we have decarbonised faster than any other G20 country. And so sometimes environment groups come to me and say, oh, you're rubbish, the government's not doing anything. It's like we're doing better than any other major country on the planet. And we're the first G20 country and still the only G20 country to have more than halved our emissions. But it is a process here. It's fantastically complex, and as I said, with evolving technologies. So things like minibuses, you make an absolutely valid point, but we are spending lots of money on electric buses. We've got we call it the ZEBRA program, the zero emission bus program. We're funding lots of local authorities to have electric buses, and I'm sure Guy knows more about the detail of that than me. But actually, a lot of what I know with the manufacturers of vehicles and of cars and buses is that the technology is progressing really, really rapidly, but it hasn't solved everything instantly. But because battery technology has moved so much further forward, they're able to do things now they couldn't do before. So I mentioned electric mopeds, for example, that there are now, I think 60% of moped sales are now electric. That's sort of happened without any government mandate, because the technology was just there, and they're an awful lot better, and that's why you see all these, food delivery mopeds. They're largely electric, and as I say, the government is supporting electric buses generally, and I'm sure that the manufacturers will get there with electric minibuses in due course. I'm very happy to look at it and talk to manufacturers about where there's a particular gap there. I think it's probably just that the market isn't that big. The economies of scale aren't there yet, and it will be something they do in 2 years time, as opposed to having done it 10 years ago or 5 years ago.
Thanks, Guy.
Sure. I mean, the short answer is there isn't a demand to create a particular manufacturer who's going to do a specific thing right now to the degree to which we would like it. Now, large-scale county council buses, there is the demand. We've kick-started it, we've primed it with government cash, the what's called the ZEB Bus One program, is obviously funded by government, but also is driven by the market. The second announcement is coming soon. Watch this space, as they say. It's in a parliamentary spring, which normally means in the next month. We hope to be in a position that we will then be funding that. My belief is, though, that as we phase all types of traditional bus out, the difference between a small minibus and a larger bus is not that much different. And you're going to get the manufacturers who, if you speak to the bus manufacturers, there's about 4 in the UK who are the major ones, they all say they're on a journey, and within a matter of years, they'll be fully up to speed and creating, all they'll be creating is zero emission buses.
Thanks, Ryan. Matt?
Yeah, and I'd sort of add to that really, which is 5 to 10 years ago, we were still talking about should we have some hydrogen cars, or will batteries maybe get there? And now that's a completely bonkers conversation. And what you've seen is just all of these use cases and all of these road vehicles just go plip, 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 as they are definitely going to become electrified. Minibuses are on there. We haven't got there yet. They definitely will be. In fact, I'm quite optimistic. I think actually all road vehicles will be electrified. We'll never have hydrogen vehicles on the road, just because batteries keep on getting better and better and better and better.
Matt, thank you very much. And as I say, unfortunately, that is all that we have time for this panel and for this conference today. I want to thank, and please join me in thanking our panellists, Matt Finch, Anthony Brown, Daisy Powell-Chandler, and Guy.
Thank you.
Thank you all again for joining us for